How are you going to afford this? How are you going to finance this? How are you going to figure out the logistics of what makes the money work so that you can actually create your multi-generational home? So I'm going to share with you 5 questions that I think every family needs to ask themselves when they're planning for their multi-generational home related to money. Welcome to Home After 50. I'm Juli Ford, and this is a show about reimagining what life can look like in this next chapter. Here we explore home, family, reinvention, and the evolving ways that women after 50 are shaping lives that are meaningful, grounded, and true. I'm so glad you're here. Welcome back to Home After 50. Before we jump into today's episode, I just have to tell you I'm having so much fun this week. I'm getting ready for a new photo shoot tomorrow. I have not done a photo shoot since June of last year, and it was time to get some fresh photos, and I am working with the same photographer. We're going to be in the same location. My daughter is coming to film video content during the shoot, just like she did the last time. And I have such a feeling of joy and ease going into this photo shoot, so much more so than I did the last time, because things are so familiar, right? So that is actually not even what I'm planning on talking with you about today, but what it was making me think of is that things just seem so much harder when we've never done them before. And once we have some familiarity, some experience with them, they just start to feel so much easier, and we allow ourselves to approach them with more joy and excitement. So today I was at the flower farm, one town over, cross street flower farm in Norwell. Oh my gosh, most beautiful flowers. There's these zinnias and dahlias and cosmos in season, and oh, it's going to be so pretty. And I'm just getting to experience this round of a photo shoot with so much more joy, such a bigger sense of fun, and it's just a pleasure. So when you are thinking about multi-generational living and you have never done this before, it can seem incredibly overwhelming. And for the most part, people who talk with me, either in the comments on social media, send me emails, schedule clarity calls with me, consult with me, have me help them on the real estate side, whether that's through referrals or through lending services or through supporting them locally with real estate transactions myself. Everyone is experiencing this for the first time when they come to me for help. I don't think I've had anyone come to me for help with this that's like, gee, we did this before 20 years ago, and now we're just ready to do it again, because they probably don't need all the support and information that I can provide if they've already done it before. So for the most part, I'm having these conversations about multi-generational living with people who are doing this for the first time. And so rather than there being this tremendous sense of joy and fun in the anticipation, there's usually more of a sense of overwhelm and stress, even if they are excited about the end goal. And I shared on social media earlier this week that I met with a mother-daughter duo last week who are planning their multi-generational home. They were sort of the 2 people in the family who are driving the train. And that usually is the way that it is. There's usually 1 or 2 people in a family who are getting this thing off the ground and keeping the logistics moving and getting everyone on the same page and learning and keeping the whole thing moving forward. And we had a fun laugh because they were kind of feeling overwhelmed and wishing that they were at the fun part. And for them, the fun part was thinking about, when do we get to pick out the paint colors and the countertops and think about decorating the new house together. And the truth was they just weren't there yet because they were in the early stages. So I encourage them to start thinking about planning for their multi-generational home in phases. And then, of course, allowing themselves to also dip into the fun part of the planning, because that's what keeps us going, right? So today I want to talk with you about a topic that I find is probably the most overwhelming and stressful for families when they're considering planning for a multi-generational home. And that is the topic of money. How are you going to afford this? How are you going to finance this? How are you going to figure out the logistics of what makes the money work so that you can actually create your multi-generational home? So I'm going to share with you 5 questions that I think every family needs to ask themselves when they're planning for their multi-generational home related to money. We're going to cover them a little bit today on the show. And then if you would like to take a deeper dive into this topic of multi-gen money, I am hosting another multi-gen finance workshop next Thursday. If you're listening to this in live time, the workshop is coming up on Thursday, August 20th, 2026, 11 a.m. Pacific, 2 p.m. Eastern, and it will be recorded. So I will include a link to register in the show notes. You can always go to juliford.com/multi-gen, and I will add a button to the top of that page where you can just click through to register for free. The workshop's completely free. If you can't make it live, then you will get a recording. So even if you're listening to this after the date of the workshop, if you use that link and you go register for the workshop, I'll send you the recording, even if it's after the date. But I hope that you're hearing this before the workshop, before August 20th, that you'll join us live because we will leave time for questions and answers. Now, the last time we did this workshop, more than 200 people signed up to attend live, and then more than 300 signed up to get the recording. So I know there's a lot of interest in this topic. We had so many aha moments on the workshop. I do this workshop with my lending partner, Michael. We are able to cover so many more possibilities for funding a multi-gen home than you probably ever knew were available to you. So if this is a topic you want to go into greater depth with, please do plan on joining us for that. So let's get into the questions. Question number 1, 5 questions that every family should ask about money when planning your multi-generational home. Question number 1, is a standard mortgage really my only option? The answer to that is no. But most people come to me thinking, well, we just need a conventional mortgage and only one part of the family is going to be in the mortgage. And that part of the family better have very high income and strong credit. And I guess that's the only thing that's available to us. And that is simply not true. On the workshop, we're going to cover more than 9 different ways that you could potentially fund your multi-gen home. And we even get into using a reverse mortgage as a possibility. We talk about bank statement loans when you own a business and you don't have a traditional W-2 to prove your income to a bank. We talk about construction financing. There's so many different ways that you could potentially fund your multi-gen home. And we're going to get into all that on the workshop next week. So just don't worry if you think that a traditional mortgage isn't going to work for you. There may very well be a solution out there. Okay, question number 2. How does a parent's contribution to the multi-generational home actually have to be structured? And this is the family money conversation that people really don't put enough thought into ahead of time, because the structure of this really matters for many, many reasons down the road. And if you get it wrong, this can affect your lending qualifications. It can affect taxes. It can affect retirement planning. It can affect healthcare costs and how they're covered and paid for in the future. It can affect ownership rights. It can affect how siblings who aren't living in the multi-generational home are feeling about what's happening and how their future potential inheritances could be impacted later on. So this is a question you really need to ask up front. How are we going to structure everyone's contributions to the home? But there are extra considerations that need to be factored in when you're talking about the older generation, specifically because of issues surrounding age, healthcare, Medicare, Medicaid. All of these things come into the calculation and into the planning process. So you really need to think this through ahead of time. Question 3, what does it really cost to live apart versus live together? A lot of families are planning a multi-generational home because they understand there could be some cost savings. But what I've found is people are actually really shocked by the level of the cost savings. It is generally, for most families, in the tens of thousands of dollars every year. And a lot of the time people are not thinking about the layers of the cost savings. So certainly there are cost savings with not paying 2 mortgages or 2 electric bills, but there are other cost savings involved that you might not even be thinking about, like the cost that it might be taking for you to go visit loved ones now. If you live a couple of states away or across the country from one another and you have to actually fly back and forth to see one another, or the time you have to take off from work to do that, or even the daily cost of going to visit your mom. A client of mine comes to mind that works a full-time job, and every day after work, she drives 40 minutes in traffic to go see her mom, to make sure that she is taken care of, that she's fed, that her house is in order, and then turns around and drives back home, finally gets home for the evening, and then the next day after work does it all over again. The cost of the gas, the time, the energy, the resources involved in doing that are really heavy for a lot of families. So thinking about every layer of the cost, and we will go over this in the workshop. I'm going to show you some charts that Michael and I have about what it really costs to live apart versus live together, and the cost of care in aging, child care, all of the things that you need to think about when you are comparing what it's like to live apart versus to live together. All right, question number 4. If a parent puts in more money, do they own more of the house? This comes up a lot, and it really taps into this idea of fairness, ownership. And the honest answer to this is that it depends entirely on how you set it up from the beginning. And almost nobody does it right the first time without some guidance. So these are conversations you should have ahead of time. And, I often talk to families about this concept of fair is not the same as equal. And here's what I mean by that. Many, many times when families are coming together, some part of the family has more financial resources than the other. But what is also true is that in general, some part of the family or someone in the family may also have different kinds of resources other than financial resources to bring to the picture. And that is often in terms of physical labor, skill, energy. So when you think about what's required to run a home, the landscaping, the repairs, the cleaning, the food prep, the shopping, the errands that need to be run, the cars that need to be maintained. There are so many activities, tasks, chores, costs involved in running a home. And it's quite frequent that some generation of the multi-generational home has more money and some has more energy, more maybe skill, more physical capacity to handle those things. So when you're negotiating in your family and planning for your multi-generational home, it's really good to keep in mind, how are we going to structure this based on everyone's contributions, recognizing that not all contributions are financial, and then you can make the decisions as a family about what feels fair. Maybe you have one part of the family contributing more financially, the other contributing more with physical contributions, so labor for the household. Maybe you decide that the weight of that is balanced and your ownership is going to be equal. Or maybe it's not. Maybe it feels imbalanced and you set up an ownership structure that allows for the family to feel that everyone's contributions are equally reflected in the ownership structure of the house. But these are the questions that you need to be asking ahead of time. All right, last question for today. Question number 5. What happens if something goes wrong down the road? And not necessarily just wrong, but what if something changes? So this taps into a lot of people's fears about illness, divorce, death, loss, grief, conflict, but it really does need to be thought through ahead of time because all of those things come up in our lives, right? These could be some hard conversations to have ahead of time, but I always say to families, it is absolutely the most loving thing you can do to talk about these things before they happen. Because if you've had that conversation, okay, what if someone's marriage doesn't work? What if someone's job is relocated too far away from here to live here any longer? What if someone has a bankruptcy? What if someone gets really ill and needs additional care that we can't provide in the home? If you have those conversations ahead of time and make the best plans that you can. Now, let's acknowledge not every possibility can be thought out ahead of time, but have the broad conversation. And even if you can, a little bit of a deeper detailed conversation, have that conversation ahead of time. Talk about what that would look like. Talk about how someone could be bought out of the house. Talk about how someone is making a commitment that maybe other members of the family are not going to be able to afford to purchase them out of, to buy their share out of. All of these things have to be thought through ahead of time. And I know it's a hard conversation to have, but if you can have this, I think it's a pretty good indication. If you can have this conversation, I think it's a pretty good indication that you're in a position to have a successful multi-generational home together. So I hope that these questions were helpful to you, to at least help you get started in thinking about the kinds of topics around money that you need to be considering before you create your multi-generational home. And again, you are so welcome to join us for the free multi-gen financing workshop on August 20th. I will drop the link in the show notes. You can always go to juliford.com/multi-gen. And there'll be a link there for you to register for free for the workshop. If you can't make it live, we'll send out the recording. But I hope you can be there live, because I would love to see you. I would love to answer your questions, and I'd love to have you be a part of it. Thanks for joining me this week. I will see you next time. Thanks so much for joining me for this week's episode of Home After 50. If this episode resonated with you, please make sure you're following and subscribing so you never miss a thing. And you can find more resources at my website, juliford.com. See you next time.